Chapter 3362. He looked at it for a long time before he put down the things and walked into the changing room. He opened the cabinet. The clothes he bought for her were all there, hanging there one by one. Almost all the tags were not taken off. Yi Mulin smiled lightly. With her family background, she would naturally not miss these things. She did not even miss him as a person. He closed the cabinet, walked out and sat on the sofa in the living room. He looked at the night view of B City and quietly looked at it. For the first time, he felt that the house was too big and the room was too empty. After smoking 2 cigarettes, he made a call. It was the most famous detective in B City, King. "I want to know someone's information and I want to get it tonight," he said softly. 10 million for 2 hours. Is there a problem? King and he had worked together for a long time. He smiled and said, "Of course not." Yi Mulin sat on the sofa and waited. He did not pack his luggage and did not go to work. Even though he was very busy and should not waste time on this, he still waited. King was very efficient. Instead of 2 hours, he only used 1.5 hours to find Bai Shuali's whereabouts. She has been staying in the presidential suite of GM Hotel for the past few days. She goes out every night and returns around midnight. She is now at a restaurant on XX Road. Yi Mulin put down his phone and transferred the money. He wiped his face, picked up the car keys and went out. When he went out, the lights were already on. He suddenly remembered that today was Bai Shuali's class reunion. They had originally agreed to go together. But Gu Changfeng's name changed everything. Yi Mulin held the steering wheel. Actually, he did not know why he wanted to see her. Should he go to get her back or to talk about a divorce? He had never thought about it. He just wanted to find her. Night fell slowly and the lights on the streets were like a long line. Countless cars were jammed on the road and it made his heart feel suffocated. Yi Mulin had not slept for more than 24 hours. He lit a cigarette to refresh himself but felt his eyes getting more and more dry. He opened the car window and let some wind in to feel better. After driving for more than an hour, he finally arrived at the restaurant. He thought that maybe she had left. But she did not. He asked the waiter and found out that there was a gathering here today. They booked a private room with about 5 tables. Yi Mulin walked up the stairs and stood by the door of the private room. The atmosphere inside was very good and warm. At a glance, he saw Bai Shuali sitting diagonally opposite him. She drank 3 glasses of red wine in a row without changing her expression. His lips curled into a cold smile as he recalled what she had said about the nightclub princess. Bai Shuali was very outstanding today. She was dressed in the standard Miss Perfect attire, especially the necklace around her neck. He recognized it. It was the necklace she wore before her marriage. It was bought by the Bai family. He had seen her wear them when he lived with her in the house. In other words, she went back to the Yi family and took away what she thought should be taken away. He held her hand and chuckled to himself. That was good. She still had some backbone. At this time, the wealthy flower horse Fong Fong stood up and said in a shrill voice, "Shuali, didn't you say that your husband would come?" Chapter 3363. Yi Mulin wanted to go in, but he clenched his fingers. He wanted to hear what she had to say. He saw Bai Shuali's face turn pale at that moment, but soon she smiled again, and she looked very happy. "So, I'm going to divorce him. You know that I can't stay with a man for more than a month. I have been married for months and I am tired of him. Now I announce that I am going to pursue Gu Changfeng again." Someone said, "It is a pity that Gu Changfeng is not here." Bai Shuali said indifferently, "I can call him and ask him to come." Then she took out her phone, as if she was going to call Gu Changfeng. everyone was stunned. Some of them were even shocked. Only Bai Shuali could live so willfully. But she did have the capital. Gu Changfeng had been waiting for her all this time. Yi Mulin couldn't wait anymore. He pushed the door open and slapped her phone away. The phone fell on the table and made a harsh sound, and she looked at him, almost stunned. She pursed her lips and said, "Why are you here?" Yi Mulin looked at her with a cold gaze. Then, he scanned the area and said in a dignified voice, "Who made her drink?" No one dared to answer, because he was the eldest son of the Yi family, and he was likely to inherit the position in the future. Although Bai Shuali's family was also prominent, she was not useful. This person from the Yi clan was different. Forcing his wife to drink was enough for him to send them to prison for 2 years just for the things they had said just now. Ma Fangfang was the first to admit defeat. "Lawyer Yi, we were just joking." "Really?" Yi Mulin said coldly, "Do you think she is easy to bully?" "No, no." Ma Fangfang said in a low voice, "We are just concerned about Shuali's private life. The newspaper 2 days ago was so bad. We are worried about her. She is in a bad mood and has drunk 2 bottles of red wine tonight." Yi Mulin moved himself to Bai Shuali's face slowly and said calmly, "She is the little princess of the nightclub. This little bit of wine is nothing." These words were said in a fit of pique, but it aroused Bai Shuali's rebellious heart. After a moment of shock, she came to herself, raised her chin and chuckled, "Lawyer Yi, you don't have to worry about me. Gu Changfeng will pick me up later." He grabbed her hand and said coldly, "You'd better make sure we're still married." "So, are you going to abuse me or rape me?" She had deliberately embarrassed him in front of so many people. She had thought that with his arrogant personality, he would turn around and leave. Because she made him lose face. All he brought out were women like Ai Wei. Bai Shuali, on the other hand, was just a worm in his eyes. She was a woman with no moral integrity. So, it was better for her to be shameless to the end. She looked at him defiantly. Yi Mulin's face was ashen. He loosened his grip on her wrist. At that moment, she thought he would let her go. But then he tightened his grip and dragged her out of the door. As he walked, he said, "Yes, I will use domestic violence first and then rape you." Bai Shuali screamed, "Help! Help!" At the reunion, they looked at each other. They had not expected it to be like this. A timid girl raised her hand and said, "Should we help Shuali?" Chapter 33-64. Everyone watched helplessly as Bai Shuali was taken away. There was silence in the room and Ma Fangfang said, "We can't control their world." At this moment, a female classmate said, "Let's call Gu Changfeng. I think we should let him know. Bai Shuali's marriage is obviously not a happy one. We should give Gu Changfeng a chance. He hasn't had a girlfriend for so many years and he is quite infatuated." Ma Fangfang said sarcastically, "Are you trying to make Gu Changfeng the mistress of the Bai and Yi families? His family is quite well off, but can he get involved in it? Do you know that Bai Shuali was supposed to marry Yi Mubai? Do you know what it means if Yi Mubai admits to the marriage? It means that they won't get a divorce easily because they can't afford it." The female classmate was not convinced. "Then why did you say those things just now?" Ma Fangfang seemed to have lost his memory. "What did I say just now? I was just trying to piss Bai Shuali off. Didn't you hear what she said? Domestic violence and rape. He is such a scary man. If we get involved in this, we will be swallowed whole." She added, "No one is allowed to make this call. We can't afford to offend him, but we can afford to hide from him." Bai Shuali could be offended because she would not take revenge. But the one in the Yi family was not a simple person. Everyone was silent, so Bai Shuali was dragged from the second floor to the first floor and finally stuffed into his car. She couldn't leave and was locked in the car by him. The moment he sat down, he pressed her face down and kissed her fiercely. When he touched her lips, it wasn't a real kiss, but a bite. It was a punishment. He was punishing her for the pain, punishing her for swallowing all the words she had said and punishing her for not remembering Gu Changfeng's phone number and not being able to call him. Her eyes were wide open and bloodshot. It was enough to show that she had not slept well these few days. Was it because she was indulging herself or because she was in a bad mood, just like him? He stopped punishing her. He stared into her eyes and asked softly with his lips on hers, "Are you still going to look for him?" Bai Shuali did not say anything and just leaned her head against the back of the seat, leaving his lips by an inch. Her lips were slightly swollen, as though she had been bullied by him. Her breathing was also messy, but her eyes were cold. She stared at him coldly, as though she was looking at a stranger. After a while, she said, "Yi Mulin, I'm serious. I'm a person, not a pet. You always think that you're spoiling me, but that's never the case. You've always been acting according to your own mood. If you're happy, you'll treat me better. If you're not happy, you'll give me a cold shoulder. You won't even tell me that you're on a business trip with your ex-girlfriend. You're even sharing a room. Are you happy?" She blinked her eyes lightly, but the corners of her mouth curled up as she spoke. Yi Mulin frowned. "I didn't stay in the same room as her. It's not important anymore." She said softly, "What's important is that I want to divorce you. I won't do anything just because you coaxed me. Yi Mulin, you overestimated my position in your heart. You can live without your wife and without me, but you can't live without a job, without partners, and without a sense of accomplishment." As she spoke, tears rolled down her cheeks. "I was right from the start. Mubai and Changfeng's personalities are the most suitable for me." Chapter 3365. He used so much strength that it almost hurt her. She bit her lips. "It has nothing to do with him. Yi Mulin is obviously you and Ai Wei." Her voice was a little choked. "I don't want to explain and I don't want your explanation either. That's it." After she said that, Yi Mulin stared at her. "You don't need to explain." "That's right." Bai Shuali smiled and leaned back on the chair. She lowered her head and took out a cigarette from her bag. She lit it and took a puff. She was a little choked, but she still took 2 deep puffs. Yi Mulin was stunned. She smoked. He quickly snatched the cigarette from her hand and threw it out of the car window. "No smoking. No smoking." Bai Shuali smiled. "Why not? We have nothing to do with Yi Mulin anymore." As she said that, her eyes were a little hot. She thought of the photo of him in Hong Kong. And the way Ai Wei looked at him. He could bring Ai Wei to Hong Kong without any scruples after she got angry. Moreover, they were photographed together dressed like that. Did he think she was dead? No matter how weak Bai Shuali was, she wouldn't do such a thing. Yi Mulin looked at her for a while and suddenly started the car. She slapped the window and shouted, "What are you doing? Where are you taking me?" "Home." "Domestic violence. Rape," he said coldly. Bai Shuali was shocked and glared at him. "You're crazy. Let me down." She slapped the window until her hand was sore and swollen. However, he didn't move at all. Instead, his face turned even uglier. The car sped through the night. When they reached his apartment, he stopped the car and turned his head. Bai Shuali curled up and said softly, "Yi Mulin, what do you want?" "I said I don't want to be with you anymore." He sat quietly and looked at the front of the car. After a long time, he turned his head. "We're not divorced yet. So, you think I'm a free prostitute?" She looked at him and smiled. Do you want to sleep with me? He didn't say anything. He just lit a cigarette and smoked quietly. He wanted to smoke her to death. He rushed back from Hong Kong just to sleep with her. He didn't say anything for a long time. Bai Shuali suddenly opened the door and got out of the car, walking towards the elevator. Her back view made him feel a little hot, so he immediately got out of the car and followed her. It was quiet in the elevator. Bai Shuali did not say anything. It was not until they reached the apartment that he closed the door and turned on the lights. She had already thrown her bag away and taken off the wool skirt she was wearing. Her long hair slid down her neckline and scattered over her delicate and fair shoulders. It was very seductive. She kicked off her shoes and stared at him provocatively. Don't you just want to sleep with me? Yi Mulan, why aren't you moving? He stared at her and took a step forward. She pressed herself against the door, still looking at him defiantly. She had drunk a little too much and her body felt warm. He lifted his chin and gritted his teeth. Bai Shuali, take back your words. She chuckled softly, can you take back your words? Why didn't I know about this? She squatted down and started to pick up her clothes. If you don't want it, I should go. But the next second, a strong force forced her to move closer to the door again. His hot body pressed against hers as if he wanted to burn her. Her head hit the door and it hurt. She looked up at him. Yi Mulan, what do you want? Chapter 33-66. She stared at him. He threw his coat aside and looked at her coldly. He held her face deliberately and looked at her. Bai Shuali leaned against the door and smiled gently, hurry up. I want to go out for a drink later. He kissed her fiercely, almost gnawing her lips. Bai Shuali didn't resist or respond to him. She just stood there and let him kiss her. He unbuckled his belt while kissing her. Suddenly, he stopped and looked at her with a gasp. Her face was very calm. She was surprisingly calm. She didn't soften after being kissed by him like before. She was very calm, so calm that he was angry. Taking 2 steps back, his lips curled into an indifferent smile. Let's go. Her body trembled, and then she picked up her clothes and put them on. She didn't even look at him. She opened the door and walked out. Yi Mulan stood there and suddenly said, don't explain. Is it because you don't love me? She stopped in her tracks. She turned back slightly and looked at him with a faint smile, what about you? It's a white lie. Isn't it because you don't love me? Yi Mulan, you will never love a woman in your life. Just hold on to your job for the rest of your life. After saying that, she left without any reluctance. The elevator closed. Yi Mulan squinted, took out a cigarette from his pocket and smoked it fiercely. After a puff, not only his lungs, but also his liver. He stood there quietly and then pursed his lips, and closed the door with great force. This was the biggest setback of Yi Mulan's life. He wanted to keep her, but he didn't know how. The disdain in her eyes made him speechless. Let him think about it. Maybe they were really not suitable for each other, but he still felt a sharp pain in his heart. It was very painful. It had never happened before. In the elevator, Bai Shuali covered her painful eyes. She didn't want to cry, but her face was full of tears. When she walked out of the apartment and stood on the street, she realized that she had left her bag in his apartment. She had no money, only her mobile phone. She stood in the night wind for a while and her tears dried up. She held the phone tightly in her hand. After a while, she called Gu Chongfeng, Gu Chongfeng, can you pick me up? On the other side, Gu Chongfeng only asked for her address and drove over. Bai Shuali stood in the wind gap and waited. It was a little cold, but there was nowhere to hide. Upstairs, Yi Mulin went to take a shower. When he came out, he suddenly found that her bag was still at the entrance. His gaze tightened, but in the end, he took his bag and went downstairs. He was only wearing a bathrobe, so he went down like this. He believed that she couldn't go anywhere without money. But when he walked downstairs, he saw a white sports car parked outside and Gu Changfeng alighted from it. He walked in front of Bai Shuali and hugged her gently. She did not refuse, because she cried, and cried without any sense of purpose. She whispered, "Gu Changfeng, can you take me away? I don't want to stay here." He said yes. Just as he was about to leave with her, he saw Yi Mulin. Yi Mulin stood quietly in the night, watching them hug each other. Gu Changfeng sighed in his heart, let go of Bai Shuali, and wiped her tears. "Are you sure you want to leave?" She raised her head to look at him and suddenly noticed Yi Mulin behind her. He looked at her coldly for a few seconds, and then walked over and threw her bag into her arms. Chapter 3367. Yi Mulin walked faster and faster. He was afraid that he would regret it. He was afraid that he would turn around and break her neck. When he returned to the apartment, he said to himself, "That's it. It's good." They were not suitable for each other. Their values were not suitable. Their living habits were different and they did not have the same vision. His favorite job, she wished him to work for the rest of his life. It was indeed not suitable for him. He returned to the apartment, opened the wine cabinet and took out 2 bottles of red wine and a goblet. He did not use the decanter, but poured himself a glass and drank it in one gulp. He drank 3 glasses in a row and his head hurt. He poured himself another glass, lit a cigarette and smoked slowly. He knew very well that he should forget about her now. He should deal with this matter in the most rational way. He should negotiate with her and coldly tell her that they could divorce, but he could give her money after 2 years, but she had to abide by some terms of the agreement. He should draft these now and settle the matter as soon as possible. But damn it, he just wanted to drink now. He just wanted to drink. He wanted to forget how she and Gu Changfeng hugged each other when he was drunk. He didn't want to think about whether she was rolling around with Gu Changfeng now. Mu Bai said that he did not trust her, but he did not trust her in everything she did. Yi Mulin held the wine glass and his face was as dark as ice. After drinking 2 bottles of red wine, he was not drunk, but became more and more sober. He walked into the study, turned on his laptop and began to draft those documents. But he stopped writing and his mind became blank. In the end, he did not know how long it took him to finish writing, but he only remembered one thing: she had custody of the little jerk, but he had the right to visit. The sky was already a little white. He raised his tired eyes and looked outside. And the ashtray in front of him was already full of cigarette butts. On the other side, Bai Shuali and Gu Changfeng went to the beach. She ran barefoot on the beach and shouted at the sea desperately, but there were always tears in her eyes. She was tired, so she sat on the beach, holding her knees with her hands and resting her chin there, looking at the dark blue sea silently. Gu Changfeng was sitting next to her and his coat was draped over her shoulders. He looked at her and smiled warmly. "Are you thinking about him?" Bai Shuali buried her face in her knees and rubbed against them, saying softly, "I don't know." She looked at Gu Changfeng and smiled bitterly. "I have always liked Mu Bai. I shouldn't be sad now that I have fallen out with Yi Mulin." Gu Changfeng let out a long breath. "Shuali, have you ever thought that you like him?" She looked at Gu Changfeng blankly and repeated, "Shuali, have you ever thought that you like him?" "Only when you like someone will you be sad, cry and worry about gains and losses." Gu Changfeng sighed. "You have all of them." She looked at him for a long time and said, "I don't like him." Gu Changfeng brushed her hair away with his fingers and said softly, "You have fallen in love with him." She remained in a daze for a long time. Then she put her little face on her knees and looked at the deep blue sea. However, she looked even more fragile. After a long time, she said softly, "I don't exist in his heart. He doesn't care what I think. Gu Changfeng, I can't afford to like such a person. There is a long distance between us. Even two Bai families cannot make up for this distance. Do you understand? Because in that person's heart, she was worthless. It was just a marriage alliance, and it was interesting to watch her, so he was willing to spoil her." Chapter 3368. Gu Changfeng sat next to her and kept her company. He said nothing. He wanted to tell her that the man she thought did not like her had liked her more than 10 years ago. He could not be wrong about that possessive look. But he gave up when he was about to say it. What was the point of saying it? He smiled and touched her head. "It's almost dawn. Shall I send you back?" She nodded, stood up and walked to the car with him. When she returned to the hotel, the receptionist told her that Mr. Yi had called her and said that he had something to talk to her about. Bai Shuali was startled and then looked at Gu Changfeng. "Go back and rest." "Thank you." Gu Changfeng nodded. Actually, he knew that Bai Shuali had nothing to do with him. She did not have anything to do with him before and now. He reached out and wanted to rub her hair, but he gave up after thinking about it. He smiled and walked out of the hotel. After Gu Changfeng left, Bai Shuali asked the receptionist in a low voice, "What did you say?" The receptionist said honestly, "I said that Miss Bai did not come back tonight." Bai Shuali pursed her lips. "Thank you." She walked into the elevator and stood there silently. She did not come back to her senses even when she reached the top floor. She only realized it when the elevator went down. She pressed the button for the next floor and took the safety ladder. She opened the door of the suite and went to check on Xiao Bai. Actually, apart from Xiao Bai, she took something else with her. The Encyclopedia of Raising a King. In order to take care of Xiao Bai, she read the book carefully. Now that she came back, she immediately went to check on Xiao Bai. Xiao Bai was lying there obediently. She took out Xiao Bai and put him in her palm. She asked in a silly manner, "Did you miss Mummy?" Little White popped its head out, revealing a pair of green bean-like eyes as it rubbed against her palm. She smiled and opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Her voice was hoarse. "Xiao Bai, Mummy will take care of you." Her eyes felt warm again when she said that, but she held it in. Just then, her phone rang. She picked it up. It was Yi Mulin's voice. "Come to my office if you are free in the morning. I want to talk to you." "Is it the divorce agreement?" she asked him softly. Yi Mulin stayed silent for a while and said, "Separation agreement." She nodded and said yes. "I'll have half an hour about 10 o'clock, he said shortly, as if he had reverted to his old, businesslike self. Bai Shuali felt that there was nothing more to say now. She said yes. After putting down the phone, she hugged Xiao Bai and cried silently for a long time. She desperately told herself not to cry, but her tears flowed down as if they were worthless, not listening to her at all. Xiao Bai didn't understand the human world. He just laid there quietly, accompanying her. Before Bai Shuali went out, she realized that her card was frozen. It was the card of the Bai family. This meant that her father knew about her relationship with Yi Mulin. He had specifically called to tell her that she was not allowed to divorce or separate. However, Bai Shuali hung up before he could finish his sentence. Without the card, she still had Little White. She would take care of Little White. She looked at the time. It was 7:30. Taking advantage of the time, she pulled out her suitcase and packed her things. Because she couldn't afford to stay in a hotel for one night. She had to move. Chapter 3369. She paid the bill with her remaining cash. When she walked out of the hotel, she only had 300 yuan on her. She was not used to living without money. She took a taxi to Yi Mulan's office and spent 170 yuan. She only had 100 yuan left, which was enough for 2 lunches. When she arrived at the office, she found that it was quiet and no one was at work. Only then did she remember that it was Saturday. She walked to his office. The door was open and she could smell the strong smell of cigarettes. Bai Shuali stood there and put down her suitcase. She said softly, "I'm coming." Yi Mulan looked up at her. He looked at the luggage beside her and then at the turtle in her hand. His voice was slightly hoarse. "Are you going back to the Bai family?" She shook her head. At this time, Yi Mulan actually had a glimmer of hope. He hoped that she would give in and move her things to go home with him. So, he looked at the documents on the table and did not talk to her immediately. At this time, Bai Shuali said softly, "I don't know where to go." Yi Mulan clenched his hands and was silent for a while. She did not say anything. Then, he said indifferently, "Let's start." He looked completely professional. She walked over and sat opposite him with a pale face. She took the document from his hand. It was a separation agreement. They would live separately for the next 2 years and divorce 2 years later. During the separation period, she could not have any scandals. He would pay her expenses. 2 million a month for living expenses and 200 million after 2 years. 200 million. It was a huge number. Bai Shuali looked at it quietly. She felt that there was no warmth in every word. She looked up at him and asked softly, "Yi Mulan, did you also list the divorce cases like this?" He did not say anything. He was not willing to answer this question. She smiled faintly again. "There is a lot of money but I don't want it and I don't need it." She looked at him. "Yi Mulan, Bai Shuali, will not starve to death without you." She paused and said softly, "I'll sign it. But you can keep the money." After saying that, she lowered her head and signed her name. When she signed, she told herself that he did not like her and she did not want to like him. After signing, she stared at her name for a long time and smiled. "You can ask me to sign it in 2 years." Throwing down her brush, she turned around and left without the slightest reluctance. Yi Mulan stared at her signature on the document and asked softly, "Bai Shuali, have you ever fallen for me?" She stopped, but did not turn around. Yi Mulan slowly lifted his gaze and looked at her stiff back. After a long time, Bai Shuali softly said, "No, never." With that said, she quickened her steps and carried Xiao Bai out with her luggage. He didn't even turn his head. Yi Mulan sat there and looked at her signature over and over again. He said to himself, "That's it, they're not suitable, so forget it." However, he was still somewhat unwilling in his heart. As for why he was unwilling, he didn't know. He thought that he liked her, but they were not suitable for each other. They could not communicate when they encountered problems. However, he did not think that someone like Ai Wei was suitable for him. Perhaps it was as Bai Shuali had said, he would have to live with the law for the rest of his life. When Bai Shuali walked out of the office, she had never felt so lost before. She had no money and could not go back to the Bai family. Where should she go? Chapter 3370. There was a pawn shop not far from the office. She pawned her necklace and a bracelet for a check of 2 million. She took the money and opened a new account before depositing it in. She was Bai Shuali and she would never think about tomorrow. Hence, she returned to that hotel and stayed for one night. She ate $2,000 a meal and bought clothes that cost tens of thousands. She wouldn't think about how she would be able to spend the $2 million in less than a month. She just wanted to have a good day. The Bai family. Her father didn't have her. He was certain that she wouldn't be able to live for long before she went back to beg for help. Hence, she was at ease living alone. She could play with her old friends, but she wasn't as happy as before. Yi Mulin was the same as before. He went to work and the time he spent in the office grew longer because he was afraid of going home. When he returned to the apartment, he would always feel that Xiao Bai would be there and that Bai Shuali would definitely pop out from somewhere to hug him and say, "Yi Mulin, I'm so hungry." After that, he rarely went back and just stayed in the office. He didn't bring Bai Shuali back and Mama Yi would always ask about it. He just brushed her off and didn't return to the Yi mansion either. There were more memories of him and Bai Shuali there. A month later, Yi Mulin had an appointment with a client at the club. B City was huge and he finally bumped into Bai Shuali a month later. She was as glamorous as before. She was wearing branded clothes and carrying a branded bag. She was eating with a few fashionably dressed girls. She seemed to be done and headed to the washroom. He stopped in his tracks and told the client to let him enter the private room first. Then, he walked to the bathroom aisle and waited. Bai Shuali came out and was a little shocked when she saw him. However, she quickly composed herself and walked over. "What's the matter?" Yi Mulin looked at her and felt that there was something different about her. As for what was different, he couldn't tell. He asked calmly, "Are you still staying there and not going back to the Bai family?" She nodded. "I didn't go back." After saying that, she was speechless. Actually, what else could they say? They were going to be divorced and become strangers. She pursed her lips and said softly, "My friend is waiting." "Excuse me, Lawyer Yi." His brows furrowed and he turned to look at her back, once again watching her walk away from him. Later on, he didn't have much of a mood to talk about business. His heart was filled with anxiety. After chatting with the client early, he walked on the street and smoked for a while, looking at the deserted street. It was already 10 o'clock. He suddenly remembered that there was something wrong with Bai Shuali today. He frowned and immediately drove to the hotel where she was staying. 10 minutes later, the car stopped and he almost jumped out of the car. He went to the front desk of the hotel and asked. The receptionist told him with some regret, "Miss Bai checked out half an hour ago." "Why?" He frowned. "Is it because she's dissatisfied with this place?" The receptionist smiled but did not say anything. Then he realized that she had no money. He thought back to the day they were going to separate. She had appeared in his office with a suitcase and Xiao Bai. She said she didn't need money. Did she sell her jewelry this month? He closed his eyes. Chapter 3371. Yi Mulin returned to his car and called King. "I want to know about Bai Shuali's current situation." King's voice was a little lazy. "It's been so long and you still haven't settled it." Yi Mulin's voice was deep. "I want it right now, right now. Look at how anxious you are. I've never seen you so concerned about a woman." King immediately got to work. In less than 5 minutes, he gave him accurate information. The Bai family froze all her credit cards a month ago. Also, she pawned a set of jewelry a month ago. The location is right below your office. You should be able to find it if you look for it. As for Bai Shuali herself, she doesn't have any hotel records. I think she either returned to the Bai family or, King said slowly, sleeping on the streets. These 4 words were like a knife stabbing into Yi Mulin's heart, making it bleed. He had never thought that the pampered Bai Shuali would end up on the streets one day. But he knew that with her temper, she would. If she didn't return to the Bai family, she would have to. His voice was soft. Continue to keep an eye on her. Let me know if there's any news. He put down his phone and started the car, searching for her on the streets. B City was huge. He had passed her by tonight, but it would be hard to find her again. He called her number. Her phone was switched off. As he drove, images of her carrying Xiao Bai on the streets flashed before his eyes. Perhaps he was wrong. He shouldn't have mentioned separation. He should have just divorced her and given her 200 million. That way, she would be able to spend 2 million a month for 10 years. 10 years was enough for her to grow. His heart was in a mess as he searched for her on the streets. 11 a.m., 1 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m. Even the streetlights were dim. There was still no news of her. At daybreak, he called the Bai family. Papa Bai wanted him to keep a low profile. The Bai family and the Yi family couldn't afford to lose face like this. The Yi family was alerted as well. They couldn't hide it anymore. He was willing to give up everything to find her. No matter how they ended up, he didn't want her and Xiao Bai to end up on the streets. He really couldn't imagine the scene of her eating a bowl of noodles that cost 5 yuan on the street. By now, everyone thought that it was over between them. Only Yi Mulin wasn't sure. He couldn't let it go. No matter how slow-witted he was when it came to emotions, he understood what his anxiety meant. When he was looking for her, he had long forgotten about the Yi family and was only worried about her. At 8:00 in the morning, he parked his car downstairs. He sat in the car and called Gu Chongfeng. He sounded tired. Gu Chongfeng, did Bai Shuali contact you? Gu Chongfeng stayed silent for a while. What happened to her? He quickly added, I saw you in front of the apartment that day. The next day, I went abroad and will only be back in a few days. Yi Mulin clenched his fists. After a while, he exhaled. If she contacts you, please keep her and contact me. Gu Chongfeng thought for a while and then nodded, okay. The two men did not speak again, but they did not hang up either. After a long time, Gu Chongfeng suddenly asked, are you trying to win her back? This time, Yi Mulin thought for a long time before answering Gu Chongfeng. He said yes. Unexpectedly, Gu Chongfeng smiled and said, I knew it. Then he hung up the phone. Yi Mulin looked a little stunned. After a long time, he leaned back on the chair and let out a sigh. Chapter 3372. He barely struggled before surrendering. To Bai Shuali. And to himself. His pride and self-control seemed to be useless. The only thing he knew was that he was worried about her. His heart ached. Yi Mulin put down the phone and smoked a cigarette. He was about to call King when he received a call. I can't find her because she has no spending records. Yi Mulin was stunned. King said, she must have run out of money. Living on the streets is the most difficult thing to find. I can't do anything without the internet. I know, continue to help me. He said calmly and drove back to the apartment. He had a feeling that she had nowhere to go and would go home. When he opened the door of the apartment, he heard a sound in the kitchen. His heart skipped a beat. She was back. Yi Mulin stood at the door and felt his chest swelling. He couldn't wait to go. But he deliberately restrained himself. He slowly closed the door, placed the key on the porch cabinet, and slowly walked towards the kitchen. Bye. He was just about to say something when he saw the ant in the kitchen. He looked disappointed. He looked at her for a long time and said softly, it's you, Ant. The ant was stunned. Lawyer Yi, why are you back? She thought of something and complained, "Miss Bai hasn't come back recently and neither have you. This house is like an ice house. It's so quiet. It's not like a home at all." Yi Mulin sat on the sofa and smoked a cigarette. "I'm getting a divorce with her." The aunt screamed, "Why are you asking for a divorce? It's normal for young girls to have a bad temper. Lawyer Yi, why don't you want Shirley anymore?" "It's not that I don't want her, it's that she doesn't want me anymore." Yi Mulin lit a cigarette and said bitterly. The aunt threw down the rag and sat opposite him. She hesitated for a while and said, "It's not like that. If you don't like such a playful girl, she won't be willing to stay at home and wait for you to come back. I saw that she was very obedient when she was with you. After all, she was an experienced person." Her words made Yi Mulin reminisce about the past. He thought of the time he spent in the Yi family's old mansion. He thought that perhaps he had been selfish. Previously, in order to control her, he had brought her to the Yi family's mansion, forcing her to live with his parents and face everything. And when he tasted the sweetness, he brought her out again just to enjoy it more. However, he forgot that his private life at night was exchanged for her boredom the whole day. He did not like her to hang out with her old friends, so she did not hang out with them. However, he could not even guarantee her a meal. Yi Mulin's eyes were a little hot and uncomfortable, an indescribable discomfort. The auntie looked at him carefully. "If you miss her, you can go after her." Yi Mulin looked at the auntie and said hoarsely, "Do you think I can pursue her?" Of course, a woman's heart is still soft. Besides, Lawyer Yi is so capable and good-looking. The auntie patted his shoulder to comfort him. He smiled bitterly. "But there are many capable and good-looking people like me around her." The auntie blinked. "But they're not her husband." "Of course they're different." Yi Mulin suddenly understood. Chapter 3373. He suddenly got up and walked into the study. He found the separation agreement and flipped to the end. He reached out and caressed the name on it. His expression was slightly bitter. Then, he tore the agreement in half and threw it into the trash can. She was such a stupid person. She didn't even know to keep a copy of the agreement when she signed it. She was so stupid. Where could she go? Where was she crying now? Was she hungry? Just thinking about it made Yi Mulin unable to take it anymore. He called King again. In the end, King was annoyed to death by him. However, no matter how capable King was, he still could not find Bai Shuali. It was as if she had disappeared from this world. Yi Mulin looked for her outside after work. He returned to the apartment in the middle of the night. Every time he opened the door, he felt that she would appear. But in such a big house, there was only loneliness and silence. He often fell asleep on the sofa after taking a shower. Sometimes, when he woke up, he would hear the sound of rain outside. The sound was especially clear in such a quiet night. He couldn't sleep anymore. He walked to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked down at the night view of B City. The entire city seemed to be crying. He stood there, feeling indescribably lonely. After standing there quietly for a while, he walked into the changing room and changed his clothes. He took his car keys and walked out. The rain was getting heavier. He drove to find her. Even though he knew that he couldn't find it, he still insisted on driving slowly on the streets of B City. There were almost no cars on the road, and only a few shops were open by the roadside. The rainy night in the middle of the night was so cold that it was depressing. He drove around B City. When he passed by a barbecue shop, he stopped his car and looked at it quietly. Bai Shuali liked to eat it. Although he said it was junk food, she still liked it. When they lived in the mansion, she always secretly ordered takeout at night. When she went to get it, it was as if she was a thief. When he asked why, she said she was afraid that the chef would be sad. Yi Mulan's lips curled into a slight smile. Actually, she was really stupid. Just as he was about to drive away, a figure suddenly appeared in front of him. His heart was almost trembling. It was Bai Shuali. She sat at a simple table. Her hair was tied in a ponytail. She sat opposite Lin Cece, waiting for the barbecue. Yi Mulan narrowed his eyes. It was Lin Cece, but how could it be Lin Cece? Didn't she hate Lin Cece to death for not being able to marry Mu Bai? Yi Mulan had underestimated Bai Shuali's desire to live. In the oily barbecue restaurant, Lin Cece knocked Bai Shuali's head. Look at you, you have to come out to eat barbecue. How are you going to go back in such a heavy rain? I just got off work and want to rest. You really don't know how hard it is to leave an IT girl hanging. Bai Shuali looked at her pitifully. She lowered her head and said somewhat shamelessly, Lin Cece, you ruined my wedding. Of course you have to take responsibility for me. I'm just freeloading some food and drinks. That's nothing, right? Nothing much. Why don't you go with Lao Bai or the man who has slept with you for a few months? Go if you have the ability. Do you think I'm still the same as before? Bai Shuali, every piece of barbecue you eat is my hard-earned money. As Lin Cece spoke, she grabbed a piece of lamb chop from Bai Shuali's hand. Bai Shuali whimpered, Lin Cece, you're so bad, mine. So she went to snatch it again. The two girls were in a mess. Yi Mulan was watching from outside. The windshield wipers in front of the car kept moving. His face was no longer as gloomy as before. So it was like this. It turned out to be like this. She actually stuck to Lin Cece so shamelessly. Fortunately, it was not Gu Changfeng. Chapter 3374. Yi Mulan just sat in the car and watched her shamelessly cling on to Lin Cece just for a bite of food. He watched her smile, but there was a touch of loneliness between her eyebrows. The windshield wiper was still brushing regularly, brushing the water, brushing the rainy night, and brushing the ecstasy in his heart. It was ecstasy, the joy of finally being with her again, and the warmth gushing out of his heart, all the way to the bottom of his eyes. He just looked at her quietly, feeling that she was just like this. Ai Wei, Gu Changfeng, and even Mu Bai had all gone far away. There was only her, who was peacefully and hatefully eating barbecue in the rainy night. Yi Mulan's Adam's apple moved gently. He wanted to get out of the car to catch her back, but he restrained himself, still sitting in the car and waiting quietly. The rain was getting heavier and heavier, and the barbecue restaurant was warm. Lin Cece looked at Bai Shuali, you are still a little bit fat. You are not afraid of getting fat, but I am afraid that you will eat me up. Bai Shuali put on a fake smile, I don't have a husband or a boyfriend now, so it doesn't matter if I am a little fat. Lin Cece sneered, I think you don't even care about your face. Although he said that, he still ordered another platter. Seeing that Bai Shuali was enjoying it, Bai Shuali was enjoying it. Lin Cece's expression was thoughtful. Before the Lin family fell, she was as arrogant as Bai Shuali could be, as if the whole world was under her feet. It was normal that the Lin family couldn't survive, but the Bai family was in the limelight. She really didn't understand why Bai Shuali would make herself like this. Bai Shuali looked powerful, but in fact, she was silly. She held her chin and watched her eat, but inadvertently saw a car parked outside the window. It was a Land Rover, which had been parked there for a long time. Lin Cece touched Bai Shuali, I am going to the bathroom. Rice Worm was dealing with the meat, so she had no time to care about her going to the bathroom. She waved her hand, you are not allowed to run away alone. I tell you, I have no money to pay the bill. Lin Cece rolled her eyes. It is raining heavily outside, where can I run? As she said, she quietly walked to the door. It was really the eldest brother of the Yi family sitting in the car. His expression was indescribable. In contrast, Bai Shuali, who was eating barbecued meat, seemed a little heartless. However, Lin Cece still felt that Bai Shuali was pitiful. This was because Bai Shuali was ignorant and incompetent, while Yi Mulin was an unimaginably powerful man. The difference between them was too great. Lin Cece quietly watched for a while, then quietly went back. After sitting down, she felt a little complicated. She nudged Bai Shuali. What's going on between you and Yi Mulin? Bai Shuali, who was eating, slowed down. She looked up at Lin Cece and then quickly lowered her head to continue eating, but she seemed a little distracted. It's nothing. He and Ai Wei got together, so we're living separately. We'll be divorced in a year and 11 months. She looked at Lin Cece and pursed her lips. He said he would give me 200 million. Do you think I should take it? I didn't want it in the past, but I have changed my mind now. You just need to support me for 2 years, and I will give you 20 million later. Lin Cece sneered, what a tempting offer. Bai Shuali, you can lie without panting. Why don't you say that you will get 2 billion after 20 years and give me half of it then?
Chapter 3375. Bai Shuali ate the meat in her mouth and said unhappily, how can you look down on me like this? I do look down on you. Don't rely on me if you have the ability. Lin Cece did not buy it and retorted. Bai Shuali put down the meat in her hand and slowly wiped the oil off her slender white fingers. She lowered her head, I know you dislike me and think that I am troublesome and can eat too much. I will leave. After saying that, she stood up as if she was going to leave. Lin Cece did not believe her and snorted lightly, Bai Shuali, don't play this trick. You said that you will leave 8 or 10 times. Even if you are not tired of acting, I am tired of watching you. Since the day he picked her up on the road after work, he treated her as if she was Bai Shuali's biological mother. This idiot did not know how to do anything. It was fine if he ate and drank at her place, but he should at least contribute something, right? Then she was too naive. This idiot's clothes were washed by Lin Cece. She personally washed them piece by piece until her hands were sore. She had to work during the day and this idiot would always be hungry until she returned home at night. Lin Cece really wanted to report to the newspaper and ask the owner to take this idiot away. But every time this idiot would show the same expression as before. Slowly, she also accepted her fate. Seeing her like this, the rice worm happily ate the barbecued meat again. Its small mouth was stuffed full. Cece, eat this too. It's delicious. Lin Cece drank a mouthful of tea and sighed. She did not have such a good appetite. But she also found it strange. This rice worm stayed at home all day playing games or talking to that little tortoise. How could it not get fat after eating so much? It had everything that should be there and the places that should be thin were still very thin. It was no wonder that Yi Mulin could not bear to let go and waited outside for so long. She smiled and looked at the empty cup. After thinking for a while, she decided not to refill it. And the rice worm was finally full. It patted its small belly and its face was full of satisfaction. All right, let's go home. Lin Cece rolled her eyes. He ate from 12:30 to 2 o'clock. Did this idiot know how heavy the rain was outside? She played with the cup and said in a bad mood, we can't leave. Why can't we leave? It wasn't raining heavily when we came. Bai Shuali said as she ran to the other side of the glass to look outside. She lay there and looked out. Yi Mulin happened to be looking in as well. Their eyes met. She was stunned and immediately realized something. She took a step back. Lin Cece was still sitting there. She asked softly, "Do you want to go back with him?" Bai Shuali acted as if she did not hear anything. She continued to look at the man in the car, and so did he. Their gazes were entangled. He found he missed her very much. It had been more than a month, and he missed her.
Even though she didn't have many good points, he still missed her. He opened the car door, got out, and walked straight in. Bai Shuali's body stiffened, and then she looked at Lin Cece. "You saw him long ago, didn't you?" Lin Cece nodded. "Yes, I was just thinking that someone could send us back." Bai Shuali was furious. She gritted her teeth and said, "I won't go back with him." "Think about 200 million. Lin Cece reminded her. "Think about your life in the past. Are you sure you want to stay with me?" Bai Shuali's face was a little confused. But after a while, she gritted her teeth. "I don't want to go back." Chapter 3376. Bai Shuali was silent. After a while, she said softly, "If you really hate me, I can leave." Lin Cece sighed and reached out to touch her hair. Silly. Yi Mulin had already walked in front of them and placed 500 yuan on the table. "It's not enough," Bai Shuali said softly. "We ate more than 600. I suddenly feel like I'm about to bleed." Yi Mulin glared at her and placed another 200 yuan on the table. He then said to the two girls, "I'll send you home." He walked in front and Lin Cece coughed. "You're happy for nothing. I didn't want to bring you home." Bai Shuali did not say anything, looking like a bullied wife. Lin Cece smiled and did not say anything more. When they got in the car, Yi Mulin asked for the address and drove. Lin Cece's apartment was not far from here. The location was good and the facilities were not bad. Could it be that Bai Shuali was still staying at her house? 5 minutes passed and Lin Cece laughed. "Thank you, Lawyer Yi. I'll go up first. You guys can talk slowly." Bai Shuali looked at her. "I'll go back." Lin Cece put on a bitter face and jumped out of the car. It was a rainy night. Yi Mulin looked at the drizzle in front of the car and said softly, "Climb to the front, I want to talk to you." She curled up in the back seat. "Why don't you climb to the back?" He met her eyes in the rearview mirror. His gaze was deep and she could not see through his real thoughts. After a long time, he said softly, "It's in the back. It's convenient for some things. Do you want me to go over?" Her eyes widened but she still climbed over and sat in the front passenger seat. "Are you looking for me or is it a coincidence?" she asked him softly. Yi Mulin turned his head and looked at her small face. She had lost weight. Although she looked like she could eat and drink, she had lost weight. He clenched his fingers on the steering wheel and paused. "I tore the agreement." Bai Shuali was stunned for a moment. She did not say anything and just looked at the rainy night outside quietly. Yi Mulin looked outside too. The drizzle hit the car and made a slight sound. It was the only sound in the car. After a long silence, she said, "I'm fine now, Yi Mulin." His heart twitched. She looked up and smiled at him. "The agreement is already in my heart. You can't break it." His fingers suddenly clenched into a fist, and his Adam's apple rolled twice before he said with difficulty, "What if I let you go back with me?" She tilted her head and looked at him. She did not avoid his gaze and said softly, "I don't want to go back. Yi Mulin, I don't want to be your rice worm anymore." She rubbed her dry eyes. He loosened his fingers and gently stroked the steering wheel. "Then you'll let Lin Cece take care of it. I won't always be like this." She lowered her head. "In the future, I won't let anyone raise me anymore. Even if it was the Bai family, it wouldn't work." If she was still a rice worm, even if she divorced Yi Mulin, she still wouldn't be able to make her own decisions in life. Actually, she didn't do anything wrong. Because she didn't do anything, she was just disliked by a man. The corner of his eye twitched. Come back with me. That won't happen again. Bai Shuali bit her lip. Ai Wei came to see me. Yi Mulin was a little shocked. It's about Hong Kong. Bai Shuali looked a little dazed. Ai Wei said that you did it on purpose because you wanted her to get out of the negotiation because she knew your style too well. But Yi Mulin, for the sake of the case, you could even use this. Chapter 3377. Yi Mulin looked at her quietly. She smiled absent-mindedly. In your heart, I'm really just a spice in your life. Yi Mulin, don't think that I'm too important in your heart. I'm not. He frowned. Bai Shuali smiled a little absent-mindedly. Her long eyelashes drooped and she almost cried. So, I won't go back with you. We'll divorce in 2 years according to the agreement. Of course, you can divorce earlier if you want. He clenched his fingers. Do you want to leave me so badly? Bai Shuali's eyes were still lowered. She only nodded heavily and looked at him. Yi Mulin pursed his lips. I'm going back. She looked down again. Lin Cece is waiting for me. Then she wanted to open the car door. But the door was locked. She put her hand on the handle and said softly, it's boring. Let's end it. He was silent. After a long time, his hand closed around hers. She trembled, but did not move. She was unwilling to respond to him. Yi Mulin's voice was very low and deep. It's not like what you said. His Adam's apple moved a little. Bai Shuali, haven't you missed me at all? No. She turned her head slowly and looked at him. After I signed that agreement, we had nothing to do with each other. His eyes fell on her little face and he stared at her tightly, not letting go of any expression on her face. He said slowly, if I said that I had been looking for you for many days, would you think that I didn't care about you? It's not a coincidence today. It's because it rained and I was worried about you. He stared at her. Bai Shuali, let's be together again. She kept staring at him, and her eyes were slowly filled with tears. She suddenly smiled. Yi Mulin, what are you talking about? Start again. Yes, I was stubborn. I said that I wanted to divorce, but you went to a hotel in Hong Kong with Ai Wei after I said that and then came back to sign the divorce agreement with me. Now you say that you want to start again with me. What about Yi Mulin? I really can't believe what you said this time. She laughed and burst into tears. Gu Chongfeng said that I like you. I think I do like you. But I can't be despised by others. Am I right? She was crying. She was crying so sadly. His heart was also very uncomfortable. He looked at her and finally reached out to hold her face gently. Don't cry. It's my fault. There won't be a next time. He wanted to tell her, I will treat you well this time. However, he vaguely remembered that he had said those words several times. Actually, she had always accommodated him, and she had always forgiven him. He had never been lenient towards her. His throat felt like it was blocked, and he felt extremely uncomfortable. He could only stroke her hair and touch her cold tears. She covered her face and sobbed, Yi Mulin, don't force me. If I go back with you, I'll look down on myself. She knew that she liked him, and because she liked him, she couldn't go back. If you like someone, you can't be despised. If you like someone, you can't be forgiven. Yi Mulin looked at her quietly. I can set you free temporarily, but I won't give up. She was in a daze. Her body leaned against the back of the chair, and her eyes were filled with helpless tears. She didn't know what to do. She had fallen in love with someone, but she had never fallen in love with him like this. She used to like Mubai. She really liked him. But that kind of love made her happy. Even if Mubai didn't like her, she was willing to chase after him. But Yi Mulin always made her feel pain. Chapter 3378. She was tearing up and crying. Her tears made him even more upset than the drizzle outside. He smoked a cigarette. The car window was not open, and Baishuali coughed a few times before he finally put out the cigarette. He looked at her and said calmly, "I won't smoke anymore. Come back with me." She shook her head, but the tears in her eyes did not stop. His heart was extremely uncomfortable, and his mind was completely blank. It had never been so blank before. He did not like this feeling. He should have made the same decision as before. He should have followed his original plan and divorced her 2 years later or now. But he did not want to give up on her. Before she could think, he had already hugged her. She looked at him with tears in her eyes and screamed, "Yi Mulin, what do you want to do?" Her voice was drowned in his mouth. It was the first time he kissed her like this. It was so deep that he was shocked. He did not care if he hurt her, did not care if she was in pain, and did not care if he felt anything when kissing her like this. He only knew that he wanted to be with her in the most intimate way possible. So, the kiss became hungry and thirsty. She resisted with all her might, but it was useless. Her arms and body were held tightly in his arms. It was painful, but he kissed her even more. Yi Mulin had been gentle with her before, but he had never treated her like this. He was very anxious. He was a traditional man and liked to do all kinds of indescribable things to her in the bedroom. He had never done it outside. But at this moment, in the rainy night, in the car, he could not wait any longer. As he kissed her, he moved one of his hands nimbly around her body. She moaned hoarsely and went limp in his arms. Then, her body began to tremble. She sank her teeth into his shoulder, biting hard enough to draw blood. She cried out in pain and said no. She could not stop him. She could not struggle at all in such a narrow space. In the car, it was so warm that there was only rapid breathing and a voice that she did not want to admit. But, it was very awkward. It felt like it had ended as soon as it came. They did not even know if it had lasted for a minute. Yi Mulin did not look too good. Baishuali was also a little shocked, the air froze. After a long time, he said hoarsely, "It's been too long without a woman." Baishuali was still lying in his arms. She was stunned for a long time before she whispered, "Really?" She remembered that he had never done this before. He said it was his first time as a newlywed, and he had never done this. Her reaction somewhat annoyed him, and he angrily pressed down on her to do it again, but she quickly rolled to one side. She straightened her clothes and pursed her lips, "I have to go. Yi Mulin, if you dare to treat me like this again, I will sue you for rape. Think about it, with your status, you can't afford such a scandal." He originally wanted to show off his masculinity to prove that he wasn't a bro, but since she was like this, he wanted to let her go. Thus, she slowly tidied herself up. She couldn't walk out anyway. After cleaning up, he glanced at her and smiled. "You must be feeling terrible now. It's not like you didn't feel anything just now." Baishuali was so angry that she kicked his leg. "Yi Mulin, open the door." He tilted his head to look at her. "When I touched your body just now, other than your stomach being very full, there wasn't much meat anywhere else. Are you sure you still want to do it outside?" She looked down and said in a low but firm voice, "Open the door." Chapter 3379. Bai Shuali turned her head. Yi Mulin took out a card from the cabinet in front and placed it in her palm. Don't always spend other people's money. She looked at the money in her palm and slowly squeezed it. Then, she gently put it back in his hand. I don't need it. Her hand also gently broke free from his hand and quickly ran into the apartment building in the drizzle. Yi Mulin sat quietly and didn't stop her. He didn't even close the car door. He just looked at the empty seat and watched her run away. He watched for a long time. His gaze fell back to his hand and looked at the thin card. He knew that her biggest hobby was to have endless money to spend. He had deposited 100 million in this card, but he couldn't say it in the face of her tears. When she even gave up her biggest hobby and didn't want his money, he knew that she really wanted to leave him. She wanted to completely break up with him. At this moment, Yi Mulin felt that even though his career was so successful now, even though he had earned billions from this international case, he was still lonely. He had the whole world, but the person he wanted to support didn't want to stay in his world. He laughed softly, and it was a lonely laugh. He could force her to stay, bring her back, rape her like in the past, and keep her in his bed. But it was different now. Even if he kept her by his side for the rest of her life, she would only hate him. In her heart, she already thought of him as a heinous person. The cold wind and drizzle entered the car and wet the expensive leather seats, but he didn't care. He just sat there and smoked. Upstairs, Bai Shuali came out of the bathroom. She was wearing pajamas that only covered her buttocks. Because Lin Cece was 7 or 8 centimeters shorter than her, it was a little small and short. But for a homeless worm like her, it was good enough that someone took her in. She walked out, her eyes still red. Lin Cece stood by the window with a cup of hot cocoa in her hand. She gestured with her eyes. Your loyal husband is still downstairs. Bai Shuali sat on the sofa, hugging a pillow and not saying a word. Lin Cece laughed. What's wrong with you? Didn't you feel good just now? Although, the time was a little short. You're really a pervert. All you do is peek at others. Bai Shuali directly threw a pillow over and shouted. Her oval face was flushed red because she was really too embarrassed. Forget about being spied on, Yi Mulin only had 1 minute. Lin Cece held the cup in one hand and caught the pillow in the other. She smiled gently. Bai Shuali, are you angry because you can't satisfy your desire? Bai Shuali's face turned even redder. I didn't. That's good. Lin Cece coughed softly. However, I really didn't expect Yi Mulin, who looks like an elite, to last less than a minute. She saw it from above. The car vibrated suspiciously for a while and then stopped abruptly. As expected, men who hadn't had sex for a long time were all fast shooters. Even someone as noble as eldest young Master Yi was the same. Bai Shuali was so angry that she didn't say anything. Lin Cece looked over and smiled. He's still there. The door isn't closed. It's such a waste of such a good car. Don't say any more. I won't go back. Bai Shuali hugged the pillow shamelessly. Chapter 3380. Lin Cece's eyes darkened. Women get divorced. Just like the goods in the supermarket, they have to have a discount. After that, she lowered her head and took a sip of the hot cocoa. The drink was warm, but it could only warm her body, but not her heart. Bai Shuali was still looking at it. After a long time, she asked softly, Lin Cece, is this your realization? Yes. I finally have Lao Bai, but he was ruined by you. Lin Cece smiled lightly. The rice worm was about to jump up. My marriage with Lao Bai was ruined by you. I haven't asked you to take responsibility, Lin Cece put down the cup slowly and put on a fake smile. Bai Shuali, you should thank me. Lao Bai doesn't like you. Even if he married you, it wouldn't change anything. Instead, it's better now. Besides, I'm responsible for you. I don't have that thing to make you feel good. You see, although Yi Mulin is useless and only lasts for a minute, it's still a minute. She was full of ridicule. How could Bai Shuali stand her provocation? She blushed. He's not like this usually. Oh. Lin Cece raised her eyebrows with interest and a little provocation. Bai Shuali was actually good-looking but useless. Her mouth was not as good as Lin Cece's. She blushed. He can do it once in 1 or 2 hours. Lin Cece couldn't hold it anymore and spat out a mouthful of hot cocoa. She laughed uncontrollably. Lin Cece stared at her. Sorry, I really couldn't help it. Lin Cece wanted to be serious, but she still laughed. Our rice worm was angry. She ran to her room with a pillow. Lin Cece, you're so bad. Lin Cece looked at her back and stopped her with a smile. Bai Shuali turned her head and stared at her angrily. She was ashamed and angry. She regretted it. She should have taken Yi Mulin's card. It would have been better if she could have taken out a lot of RMB and thrown it at Lin Cece, the bad girl, to smash the evil smile on her face. She looked ashamed and angry, but Lin Cece became serious. Her eyes were even gentle. Bai Shuali, in fact, if I were Yi Mulin, would also like you. Bai Shuali's gaze was a little straight. He said that I'm shallow and that I'm a rice worm. What do you think he likes about me? Of course I like your big waist. Don't tell me it's because your head is full of idiots. Lin Cece's style was back. Bai Shuali threw the pillow in her hand at Lin Cece and roared, Lin Cece, you're really too hateful. Serves her right for not being able to get married. Lin Cece was not angry. She picked up the pillow with a smile and patted it. In any case, I'm divorced, and you're still divorced. From the perspective of the starting line, I'm ahead of you. Bai Shuali glared at her, but no matter how much she glared at her, she couldn't get anything out of it. She could only run away angrily. Lin Cece smiled gently and put the pillow back on the sofa. Then, she heard a loud bang on the door. She was throwing a tantrum again. In fact, Bai Shuali was a single-celled organism. She didn't like Yi Mulin because she thought that Yi Mulin didn't like her anymore. She looked at the car downstairs. Yi Mulin was still there. She recalled herself from a long time ago. On a night like this, she had run a long way to ask a man if he still wanted her. He had told her that he had a fiancé and that he wanted her to leave. Chapter 3381. This man would try to get her back like Yi Mulin did. He would use a car, a house, and money to get her back. However, these things were just icing on the cake. Once she lost the feeling she liked, it became meaningless. Lin Cece stood there for a long time, then put on a coat, opened the door, and went out. She went downstairs and got into the car. Yi Mulin turned around and looked at her. Lin Cece said softly, I took her not because of old Bai, but because I owe you a favor. Yi Mulin, if you really like her, don't let her stay here for too long. I feel sorry for her. She paused for a moment before saying softly, she's a girl who likes branded goods. Can you imagine her wearing my old pajamas and a pair of slippers that cost more than 10 yuan each? Actually, sometimes when I bring back a box of fried noodles that cost 10 yuan, she enjoys it too. It's because she's disappointed in you. It's simple. She thinks that you don't like her, so she doesn't like you anymore. Yi Mulin put out his cigarette. I know, thank you. Lin Cece smiled faintly. Bring her back before you really hurt her. I get annoyed just by looking at her. And that little bastard, I'm afraid that one day I'll be so poor that I'll stew him. Yi Mulin chuckled. His name is Xiao Bai. Tortoise has a name too. Yi Mulin, actually, you're the one who's affected. It's just that you're against it, so you hurt her. Lin Cece lowered her voice. Don't make her sad anymore. Sometimes, she cries at night. The next day, her eyes will be swollen but she won't admit it. Yi Mulin's heart was instantly filled with sadness. Thinking about how she would cry and how she would bury herself in the blanket and cry secretly, he felt his heart going numb. He was silent for a moment before closing his eyes. What else did she say? Lin Cece coughed. She also said that your skills are too bad and you don't have enough time. So, she doesn't want to go back. After saying that, Lin Cece left immediately. Meanwhile, Yi Mulin's face looked as though he had eaten a pile of shit. He glared in the direction that Lin Cece had left before taking out a cigarette and taking a few puffs. Screw that 1 minute of sleep. By surely, she'd better not fall into his hands again. She'd better not let him have the chance to mess with her again. Otherwise, he would kill her. He closed the door and drove away. Lin Cece went upstairs to Rice Worm's room. Rice Worm did not sleep either. He lay there and looked at the little tortoise at the head of the bed, as if he was talking to himself. His silly look made him speechless. Lin Cece was also curious. She had seen AI way before, and she was also a great beauty. Why was Yi Mulin not moved at all? Instead, he fell in love with a brainless creature like Xueli. Although she was cute, did a couple really only need to communicate with their bodies? She quietly looked at him. After a long time, she finally went over and took the little tortoise away. Tortoise's father has left, why aren't you staying? Bai Xueli looked up and snatched the little tortoise away. He's not Xiao Bai's father anymore. You're ambitious. You can find a stepfather for Xiao Bai now, right? Or you can support yourself as well. Lin Cece sighed. If I get married one day, do you want to be part of my dowry? When she said that, Rice Worm really thought about it seriously. That's not bad. I can help you, Lin Cece looked at her. Rice Worm thought for a long time but could not come up with a solution. Lin Cece sneered. Warm the bed for us husband and wife. Bai Xueli, use your pig brain to think about what else you can do. Chapter 3382. Rice Worm was still looking at Lin Cece. She still couldn't figure it out. Lin Cece scoffed. Just as she was about to speak, Rice Worm spoke up weakly, I can be your housekeeper, take care of a child or something. Lin Cece knocked her head. You need someone to take care of you. How dare you say you want to take care of my child? I think it's more convenient for you to call me mom. Bai Xueli stuck out her tongue and kept quiet. Lin Cece looked outside. It was drizzling and the night sky was dark. After a long silence, she stretched. All right, go to bed early. Wait on me tomorrow morning. Rice Worm's face flushed red. I don't want to. You said you wanted to wait on me. Have you forgotten? Lin Cece looked at her and laughed. Bai Xueli covered her head with the quilt. I'm going to bed. Lin Cece looked at her curling up like a turtle and couldn't help but laugh. She went over and pulled the quilt. Rice Worm wrapped herself tightly in the quilt. Lin Cece laughed. Aren't you afraid of suffocating? It's none of your business. Rice Worm's voice was soft. Lin Cece shook her head and walked out. Actually, Bai Xueli had the temper of a child. She paused, she suddenly remembered that she was like this in the past. Actually, every girl was a child. It just depended on whether someone was willing to spoil them. Without someone to spoil them, they had to do everything by themselves. Bai Shuali still had someone who was willing to spoil her. Lin Cece smiled and left. When Bai Shuali heard the sound of the door closing, she quietly got up. The room was dark. She looked at Xiao Bai and took him out of the box. She murmured, "Xiao Bai, I saw your father. He came to look for me." Her voice was soft and a little silly. "But I don't want to go home with him. I'm angry." With that, her voice was choked. "Xiao Bai, am I stupid? I'd rather stay here." She laid on her knees slowly and looked at Xiao Bai in her palm. She blinked gently, she didn't want to think about it. Her mind was filled with tonight's situation and Yi Mulan's words. "I don't want to go back," she muttered, repeating it over and over. On the other hand, Yi Mulan had returned to his apartment. His body was slightly wet, so he went to take a shower. When he took off his clothes, he could still smell a unique scent on his body. He frowned, sniffed, and then threw all the clothes into the trash can. It was obvious that he had the scent of a brother. But when he came out of the shower, he couldn't help but pick up the clothes. After looking at them for a long time, he still washed them. Although it was late at night, he did not go to sleep immediately. Instead, he stood in front of the French window. From this direction, he could see the direction of Lin Cece's apartment. Although it was far away, he felt a little relieved just by standing there and looking. He stood there for the whole night. It was not until early in the morning that he realized it was already dawn. The auntie opened the door and came in. Seeing him standing there, she said with a faint smile, "Lawyer Yi, good morning." Yi Mulan pursed his lips and faintly pulled out an extremely faint smile. Chapter 3383. "I found her," Yi Mulan said hoarsely. The aunt opened her mouth in surprise and walked to the door of the master bedroom. "Oh, you're back. Let me see if you've lost weight." There was no one at the door, and the bed was neatly arranged. It didn't look like someone had slept in it. The aunt suddenly turned around. "Where is she?" Yi Mulan frowned. "She wants to stay outside for a while." The aunt looked at him suspiciously. "We've been apart for so long. Doesn't she miss you?" Then the aunt started to complain. It said that the head of the bed quarrels with the end of the bed. You have to bring the wife back and coax her. Yi Mulan smoked and raised his eyebrows, looking at the aunt. The aunt seemed to be experienced, but she blushed. "You know what I mean. Just sleep with her for one night." Yi Mulan's thoughts drifted away. Just sleep with her for one night. He had slept with Shirley last night, in the car. But it was only for a minute or less. So she was not satisfied with him. Did she think that was all he could do? Yi Mulan smoked calmly, but his face wasn't calm anymore. He felt that he should make it clear that he couldn't bear such a crime. But it was still troublesome with Lin Cece. As he was thinking, the aunt pushed him. "Lawyer Yi." Yi Mulan came back to himself and smiled. "What's up? When are you going to bring the wife back?" The aunt looked worried. Yi Mulan suddenly said, "I'll give you her number. Call her and ask her to come back to get the things. Tell her that you can't enter the master bedroom. She has the key." He gave her number to the aunt. It was Lin Cece who told him. The aunt looked at him suspiciously and said slowly, "Lawyer Yi, don't lie to me. They say that people in the city are cunning. Do you want to trick Shirley back instead of apologizing? Let me tell you, men can't do that." "No. No." These two words pierced deeply into Yi Mulan's heart. He took a deep breath, looked at the aunt and said word by word, "I'll prove that I can do it." Then he went to take a shower. The aunt was confused and then realized, did Lawyer Yi have something that was hard to say about men, so he felt so inferior? Not confident. The more the auntie thought about it, the more she felt that it was possible. After thinking for a while, she secretly added some nutritious food to today's meal. It was the good stuff she brought from her hometown, but she never had the chance to eat it. Now was the time for her to show off her skills. Husband and wife life, love life, especially nightlife, sex life, this was a must-have medicine. The auntie happily prepared a sumptuous meal for Yi Mulan early in the morning. When he came out, he was quite speechless. He looked at the auntie and said, "I don't have a woman, I don't need this." "That's right. Only after the supplement can there be a woman." The upright aunt felt that her logic wasn't wrong, so she said smilingly. Yi Mulan couldn't help but sigh, "I'm fine, both physically and mentally." The auntie was still in a good mood and said, "Young people are under a lot of pressure at work. It's normal for them to feel powerless. They'll be fine after some rest." He didn't want to go against the auntie's good intentions, and most importantly, he didn't want to listen to her nagging, so he ate the deer antler porridge, but as soon as he got into the car, his nose started to bleed profusely. Drop by drop, it dripped onto his trousers. It was a ghastly sight. Chapter 3384. He frowned and dialed Secretary Lee's number. "Cancel all my plans for today." "No, I'll cancel all my plans for this week." Secretary Lee was shocked. What was wrong with her boss? When she asked, Yi Mulan's voice was very calm. "Go to the hospital." Secretary Lee was even more shocked. After a long time, she coughed lightly. "Is it serious?" Yi Mulan said indifferently, "He's suffering from excessive internal heat and has a nosebleed." Hearing this, Secretary Lee suggested in a low voice, "Is it because Mrs. Yi hasn't been home for a long time? Should we ask her to come back? Maybe Lawyer Yi won't be suffering from excessive internal heat." How did everyone know that Lawyer Yi was going to divorce? The cleaner saw a lot of printed divorce agreements in Lawyer Ye's wastepaper basket. However, the colleagues in the law firm only dared to discuss it in a low voice and didn't dare to ask Lawyer Yi. But now, Lawyer Yi was suffering from excessive internal heat because he didn't have a wife. How uncomfortable it was. After Secretary Lee said this, Yi Mulan's face was completely black. After a while, he asked with a dark face, "Do you talk about me like this behind my back?" Secretary Lee coughed lightly. "Absolutely not, Lawyer Yi. Absolutely not, absolutely not." Yi Mulan hung up the phone decisively. Then, he took a few tissues to cover his nose and cursed in a low voice, "What the hell is this?" His temples were throbbing with pain. He let out a long breath and started the car. The car drove into Xingyuan Hospital. The legendary Qin Chen treated him. Qin Chen was wearing a shirt and a white doctor's robe outside. He was elegant and elegant. From time to time, the young nurses would secretly glance at him. So, Yi Mulan's head hurt even more when he looked at him. After the examination, Dr. Qin leaned against the desk behind him leisurely. "It's not a big problem. It will be solved with a proper sex life." Yi Mulan wiped his nosebleed again and glared at her. "I have a wife." Qin Chen smiled. "Your wife is with Cece. Take her away if you can." Yi Mulan was furious. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" Qin Chen had always been very naughty. He smiled and said, "Lawyer Yi, who is busy every day, is looking for a wife. I thought you didn't need a wife. Besides, you didn't ask me." Yi Mulan glared at her. "You said I'm fine, but I feel very uncomfortable. I need to stay in the hospital for a week." Qin Chen shrugged as if he had heard a fantasy story. Lawyer Yi, don't waste public resources. Go and fight for money every day. Then, she smiled wickedly, but no matter how rich you are, it's quite pitiful to not have a wife to warm your bed. Yi Mulin could not take it anymore and kept glaring at her. However, Qin Chen stood up straight and scribbled a note. All right, go to the hospital. Also, our hospital has launched a package. It's 1 million for contacting family members. If we want to make it bigger and stronger and expand our media coverage, it's 10 million. Do you want to buy it? This was simply a scam. Qin Chen was Yi Muyun's personal henchman. While Yi Mulin was thinking, Qin Chen was still smiling and said very wickedly, "This is my private business." Yi Mulin scribbled a set of numbers. I choose the 1 million package. However, Qin Chen did not accept it. He sighed softly. Lawyer Yi, you misunderstood. If you buy the package 2, you will get the package 1. Yi Mulin was so angry that his nose bleed again. Qin Chen, it's a pity that you are not a profiteer. Chapter 3385. Qin Chen said slowly, there's nothing we can do about it. It's not easy to meet a fat sheep. She paused for a moment. I heard that Lawyer Yi did a good job this time. You squeezed out your ex-girlfriend in this business negotiation and won a few billion yuan in one go. We don't have this kind of ability, so we can only rob the rich and help the poor. Yi Mulin's temples throbbed. He had long heard that Qin Chen was difficult to deal with. Today, he saw that he was worse than the rumors said. Fortunately, he became a doctor. If he was a lawyer, how bad would he be? Yi Mulin's face turned cold. He wrote another check and made a request. I only want 1 package. Don't disturb the media. Qin Chen smiled lightly and didn't say anything. He just asked the nurse to take him to the ward. Yi Mulin couldn't stay idle in the ward. There was everything here. There was even a study. He made the best use of it and asked Secretary Li to send a pile of documents. When Secretary Li came over, she thought that her boss's brain must have gone haywire. Lawyer Yi, you just don't want a divorce. You made such a big scene just to get your wife back. If you had the desire to live, you wouldn't be in the hospital now. Why do you need a divorce agreement? Yi Mulin lowered his head to deal with the documents and asked calmly, did Lin Cece receive the message? Secretary Li was a little stunned. What message? Yi Mulin was patient. Go and ask Dr. Qin. She will understand. Secretary Li nodded. She had a bad feeling in her heart. Sure enough, she went to find Qin Chen. Dr. Qin first made a cup of tea for Secretary Li and personally sat her down. Secretary Li was used to seeing Lawyer Ye's good-looking face. It was reasonable to say that she wouldn't eat good-looking men, but Qin Chen, Dr. Qin was really good-looking. His gestures were full of nobility. Yes, nobility. Her little heart was thumping wildly. She knew that Qin Chen was a woman. But at this moment, it didn't matter. What mattered was that Dr. Qin was better looking, more handsome, and more noble than any man. Also, that cup of coffee was really delicious. When Secretary Li was fascinated, Qin Chen sat on the sofa and took a sip of coffee. Then he smiled faintly. Oh, I forgot to tell you, Secretary Li. I have already sent out the draft. Please rest assured, Lawyer Yi. Secretary Li's heart skipped a beat. What draft? Lawyer Yi and Mrs. Yi want a divorce and now regret courting each other. Qin Chen smiled and said, it's written by a girl who writes soft articles in our hospital. The writing style is pretty good. Lawyer Yi will be satisfied. Secretary Li's jaw dropped. She thought Lawyer Knight would rip her jaw off. Sure enough, after she said it, Yi Mulin roared, "Qin Chen. That bastard." It was a pity that she had become a woman. Otherwise, she would be even more of a bastard than a man. She felt that there was nothing in the world that she did not dare to do. She knew that once this thing was sent out, it would throw a huge wave of stones at the White and Knight families. He did not dare to imagine what Baishuali's situation would be like. If she does not want to go home. Yi Mulin immediately stood up and wanted to find her. But after a while, he calmed down. Since things had come to this, why not just leave it like this? Secretary Li looked at her boss's face and did not dare to speak. Chapter 3386. Secretary Li carefully took the manuscript to him and looked at him eagerly. Yi Mulin took a look and accidentally had a nosebleed again. Secretary Li hurriedly took out a piece of tissue to wipe it for him and then said carefully, "Do you want Dr. Qin to change it?" "Why should I change it? It has already been sent out. If I change it, do I still have face?" Yi Mulin glanced at Secretary Li. Secretary Li didn't dare to say anything and bit her lip. Yi Mulin wiped the nosebleed and waved his hand. Okay, you can leave now." Secretary Li was still worried and said in a low voice, "Lawyer Yi, I'll go get some herbal tea to cool you down." Yi Mulin waved his hand impatiently and signaled her to leave. But before Secretary Li left, he stopped her again. "Wait a minute." Secretary Li turned around. Yi Mulin coughed softly. "Call Baishuali and tell her that my life is in danger." Secretary Li blinked and said, "It's dangerous to be burned with desire." Yi Mulin glared at her fiercely. "Li Qinyu, do you still want to be a secretary? I'll be scolded even if I tell the truth." Secretary Li whispered. Her careful and aggrieved look was actually a bit like Baishuali's. So, Yi Mulin was a little stunned for a moment. He just looked at her like that for a long time. Secretary Li's little face turned red. "Lawyer Yi, although you are very rich, you can't be so desperate. What nonsense are you talking about?" Yi Mulin came back to his senses and said calmly, "Call her and tell her that I'm very sick and want to talk about the inheritance." Secretary Li was scared. "Isn't that cursing yourself?" He rolled his eyes at her and she immediately went to make the call. After Baishuali received the phone call, she was silent for a long time. Secretary Li thought that she would cry and shout to come over. After all, Secretary Li thought that Baishuali still loved Lawyer Yi very much. Her eyes were full of pink when she looked at Lawyer Yi. After waiting for a long time, Baishuali just asked softly, "He is not dead, is he?" "What?" Secretary Li cried bitterly for his boss in his heart. It turned out that he didn't treasure him as much as he thought. To think that Lawyer Yi thought about him day and night and even had a nosebleed. Secretary Li thought for a moment and coughed lightly. "It's like this. Lawyer Yi woke up this morning and was bleeding non-stop. He's now in the hospital. The rumors outside are a bit unpleasant." Baishuali was silent for a while before asking, "Am I here to sign a will?" Secretary Li was crying in his heart again. Just in case. He might not really die. Nowadays, medical skills are very advanced. Baishuali nodded. Just when Secretary Li felt that she didn't care about Lawyer Yi at all, Rice Worm asked in a hoarse voice, "Will he die?" Secretary Li was stunned. Was she crying? For a moment, she was at a loss. She didn't know how to coax a girl. What should she do? On the other side, Rice Worm was crying sadly. As he cried, he wiped away his snot. "I'll be there in a moment." Secretary Li finally heaved a sigh of relief. He still cared. She immediately went to the ward to report the good news, but as soon as she entered the door, she was stunned. Her boss was leaning in front of the bed. In front of him was a beautiful and big little nurse. Her boss had a nosebleed. Qin Chen was also by the door, taking a photo with his phone. Perfect. This photo is worth a lot of money. OPPE mobile phone, simple, super perfect, especially clear. Chapter 3387. Qin Chen came over and patted her shoulder with a smile. Let's split it. Secretary Li stared at her, his eyes fixed on her. Qin Chen smiled faintly and left with his phone. Secretary Li's heart was still beating fast. At this time, the beautiful nurse came over and patted her shoulder with a smile. Don't fall in love with Dr. Qin, okay? Secretary Li looked at her and the nurse smiled again. Because Dr. Qin belongs to all of us. Waiting for her to leave. Yi Mulin put down his sleeves and said discontentedly, how is this a hospital? It's simply a group of demons and ghosts. Demons and ghosts, why are you still here? Secretary Li complained in a low voice. Yi Mulin didn't argue with her and asked indifferently, did you make the call? Secretary Li nodded and then looked at him carefully. Lawyer Yi, Mrs. Yi said she would come in a while. Yi Mulin lay down immediately. Look at me, do I look like a patient? Not really. Secretary Li shook her head. You look like a dragon horse. Like a beast, the kind that Yu Qiu was not satisfied with. Yi Mulin rolled his eyes at her and didn't say anything. He asked her to bring the notebook over. He waited for a long time but Bai Shuali didn't come. Because Bai Shuali didn't have a taxi, it took an hour to take the bus from the apartment to here. So Yi Mulin endured for an hour and had a nosebleed twice. As soon as Bai Shuali arrived at the hospital, she was invited to Qin Chen's office by the nurse for a lecture. Of course, Qin Chen talked about it as Yi Mulin's attending doctor and spiritual mentor. After the talk, Bai Shuali came out as if she was covered with frost. At this time, Qin Chen sent a WeChat message to Yi Mulin. There were no words, only a photo. Is it worth 10 million? Yi Mulin looked at the photo of him splattering blood in front of the nurse and almost vomited blood again. This was a scam. He immediately asked Secretary Li to do it. Secretary Li didn't feel distressed. Instead, she felt that Qin Chen was very powerful. Her boss had to work hard for a few months to earn a big case, but Dr. Qin specialized in dealing with these big bosses. Seeing Lawyer Ye's face was dark, he still wanted to pay. Bai Shuali pushed the door open and came in. She was dressed very plainly. Just like that night, she wore a white hooded tracksuit and a pair of black pants. Her sports shoes were also simple. They were not branded and were bought by Lin Cece at a supermarket. It could be said that she was very shabby compared to her past. However, she seemed to be used to it. She walked in naturally and didn't feel that there was anything wrong. Yi Mulin felt his heart ache as he watched. When did she become like this? In order to divorce him, she really did not want anything. He smiled bitterly. You're here. Shirley bit her lip. I'm here to talk about divorce. Yi Mulin frowned. What did you say? Bai Shuali's voice was very low. I've asked Dr. Qin. She said that you might die. She also said, divorce is better than losing a spouse. If you die and we haven't divorced yet, it will be hard for me to find someone to take over. Yi Mulin glared at her and then 2 tubes of blood flowed down from his nose. He didn't care and continued to stare at her. Secretary Li, who was at the side, quickly helped him cover it with a tissue. Lawyer Yi, don't be angry. I said that you can't be angry, it will hurt your liver. Chapter 3388. Yi Mulin ignored Secretary Li and just looked at the rice worm. Did you come here just to say this? Bai Shuoli looked at him with hot tears in her eyes. I don't know anything. Yi Mulin stared at her for a long time and then asked softly, Are you here to take care of me? Bai Shuoli didn't say anything but just lowered her head. After a long time, she raised her eyes. Yi Mulin, will you die? Although the words were not pleasant to hear, Yi Mulin still felt very happy when he saw that she was about to cry. He asked her softly, Why do you ask that? Dr. Qin said that you would not stop bleeding and would die soon. The rice worm said Qin Chen's original words. Secretary Li was about to spit out blood. Dr. Qin took 20 million yuan. It was really impressive. However, wasn't Lawyer Ye's worm a little too gullible? The rice worm still looked at him with tears. After a long time, she said softly, Dr. Qin said that. Yi Mulin pinched his nose and looked at her again. It's not very good. Secretary Li's eyes were wide open. Was it really good for Lawyer Yi to do this? However, it was useful for a rice worm. As she watched, her tears fell. She bit her lips, and her white teeth almost broke her lips. She said in a soft voice, Then why don't you let Ai Wei take care of you? Yi Mulin gave Secretary Li a look. What kind of situation is this? Why are you still standing here? Why don't you get out? Secretary Li saw his look and immediately got out. She even closed the door thoughtfully. In the quiet ward, Yi Mulin washed his face and then said softly, She is not my wife. How can I let her take care of me? She has enjoyed your body, so she has to be responsible. The rice worm said hurriedly. Yi Mulin felt that his nose was itchy again, but he held it back. He gently touched his nose and coughed. So far, only you have enjoyed my body. Don't you think you should take care of me? She stared at him with tears in her eyes and didn't say anything. Yi Mulin sighed. Bai Shuoli, are you still angry with me at this time? She seemed to hesitate for a long time and then said softly, What about the divorce? His heart skipped a beat as he listened to her. She was still thinking about this. So he smiled bitterly. Don't worry. If one day I feel like I can't take it anymore, I'll sign my name and set you free. At that time, you won't be a widow anymore. Really? She looked at him worriedly. Yi Mulin looked down. When have I ever lied to you? Rice worm lowered his head. You said you were working overtime, but you were eating with Ai Wei. You lied to me. For a moment, he couldn't find any words to refute. After a long time, he sighed. If you don't want to take care of me, then go back. I'll still sign the contract when I can't. Besides, I'll leave all my assets to you. Bai Shuoli reached out her hand. I don't have money for a taxi. Can you take out 100 yuan from your inheritance for me to take a taxi? He glared at her. Did she just say inheritance? Did she really want him to die? Rice worm probably knew what he was angry about, so he quickly corrected himself, I'm talking about property. Her tone sounded like she was acting coquettishly. Even Yi Mulin's heart fluttered a little, and all his anger dissipated. Chapter 3389. Now that she was standing in front of him, he realized that he missed her a lot. And he did hug her. Hugging her in his arms, he felt that she had lost weight and she no longer smelled like perfume. Instead, she smelled like herself. It was so refreshing that it made his heart ache. He placed his lips on her neck and murmured, Don't go, Shueli, stay with me. He buried his face in her neck and breathed in her breath. Only then did he know that it was hard to miss her. He missed her a lot. But Rice Worm misunderstood. She thought that he wanted her to accompany him for the last period of time. She recalled what Qin Chen had said. He said that Yi Mulin had a terminal illness and he probably wouldn't be able to recover. She should get ready. She didn't want to feel bad for him because he was so despicable and always forced her. He went to Hong Kong with Ai Wei and he used everything to make her sad. He only had money in his eyes. He was a lawyer who only cared about profits. She had nothing to miss. But she was still sad. Would such a strong man die? Her heart softened but she didn't say anything. Yi Mulin tightened his arms and stroked her hair. Shueli, I won't treat you like that anymore. I'll cook for you every night, okay? Bai Shueli's tears rolled down. You still want to cook in this state? She stayed silent for a while before saying softly, give me 100 yuan and I'll bring Xiao Bai over. Yi Mulin couldn't believe what he had heard. He wanted to ask but she said again, I haven't forgiven you yet. We still have to get divorced. He looked at her and smiled. Okay. He took out 1,000 yuan from his wallet and gave her a taxi. But she only took 100 yuan and ran away. Yi Mulin looked at her quietly and his heart ached. Secretary Li came in and closed the door. Lawyer Yi, I saw Mrs. Yi crying and running away. Yi Mulin opened his laptop and paused. She thought I wouldn't be able to live for long and was willing to come to the hospital to accompany me. Secretary Li hesitated. That's not a good idea. I saw her crying. Yi Mulin looked at Secretary Li and said softly, then you want me to give up such a good opportunity and continue living a life without a wife? Secretary Li only dared to mutter in a low voice, but you can't be so shameless. You'll be angry if you find out. Yi Mulin did not say anything. Because he couldn't resist the sugar-coated poison that Qin Chen fed him. However, he had been waiting for her for 2 hours, and she still hadn't returned. He was getting more and more frustrated, and he couldn't handle his work. No matter how he looked at it, he felt that this place was not good. Secretary Li just stared at the sky. You were the one who insisted on staying here. Instead of waiting for Bai Shueli, Father Yi scolded him. On the phone, Father Ye's words were very strict. Mulin, why didn't you tell us that you and Shirley had been fighting for so long? Do you know that your relationship is not only between the two of you, but also between the White Knight family? Yi Mulin thought that his father's position would be very firm, but in the end, he suddenly changed the topic. Forget it, we don't know what will happen in the future. Then he hung up. Yi Mulin's face darkened. Chapter 3390. Just as he hung up the phone, the door of the ward was pushed open. He thought that it was Bai Shueli, but it wasn't. It was Ai Wei. Ai Wei was holding a fruit basket in her hand. It was a very high-end kind. She was still the same as before, wearing a high-end suit and wearing the most tasteful perfume. Yi Mulin's face was still gloomy. He couldn't be bothered to deal with her, so he leaned against the headboard and asked, Why are you here? I'm here to see you. After all, you're seriously ill, aren't you? There was a hint of mockery in Ai Wei's tone. What? Can't you let an old friend visit you? Lawyer Yi, you're very heartless to your old friend. You can make me lose the right to negotiate with just a photo. You can easily pocket billions of dollars. You must be very proud now. Why are you still in the hospital? She smiled again. Let me guess, it must be your wife who's making trouble. Oh yeah, how could you let her see the photo when you did that? Secretary Li, on the other hand, was amused. This time, she was on Lawyer Ai's side. Lawyer Yi was too despicable. He bullied Mrs. Yi like a child. It was really despicable for a man to use the beauty trick to achieve his career. However, when Secretary Li thought about the 100,000 yuan reward this month, she felt that Lawyer Yi was right. Yi Mulin glanced at Ai Wei. If you didn't dress like that, would I have a chance to take advantage of you? Ai Wei was even more furious. You know that only I can keep you in check. Those foreign lawyers don't know you as well as I do. If it were you, you wouldn't be able to change the result. I just want to end it as soon as possible. Yi Mulin said impatiently. Now, take your things and leave. Ai Wei was a little embarrassed. She didn't expect Yi Mulin to be so heartless. Yi Mulin looked at her and said softly, Is it hard to understand? Think about what you said to Bai Shuali. Ai Wei, I don't need you to interfere in my marriage. I'll make it clear to you for the last time. No matter what happens between me and Bai Shuali in the end, I won't be with you. Ai Wei almost couldn't stand and her voice was trembling. Is it because you're useless to me that you're telling me the truth? I thought you would understand me a little, and not think about me anymore. Ai Wei, being an old friend is far more relaxing than being alone, right? He looked at her and smiled. From that moment on, Ai Wei understood that no matter how good she looked, how much perfume she wore, or how sexy her pajamas were, in front of Yi Mulin, she had no attributes of a woman. He had never taken her seriously, never. She was a little sad and didn't know what to say. At this moment, the door of the ward was pushed open. Bai Shuali was standing at the door. From her angle, she could not see Ai Wei. She only looked at Yi Mulin and said pitifully, The taxi driver gave me 100 yuan, and I told him to keep the change. So when I came back, I had no money to take a taxi, and I took the wrong bus. His tone was as pitiful as a stray puppy's. Yi Mulin raised his eyes. His voice was a little hoarse. That's why you only came now. Nodding, she walked in and took out Xiao Bai. But I didn't leave Xiao Bai on the bus. There was a time when she took the bus and fell asleep. Xiao Bai had forgotten about it. She chased the bus for 3 stops, and the skin on her feet broke. That was the worst moment of her life. Chapter 3391. At that time, she knew that she was nothing without the Bai family and Yi Mulin. She was homeless. After she said that, Ai Wei caught a trace of heartache in Yi Mulin's eyes. Ai Wei thought bitterly, so that's how it is. It was not that he was not interested in all women. At least, he liked Bai Shuali. Ai Wei smiled bitterly and was about to leave. At this time, Bai Shuali also saw her and instinctively took 2 steps back. Yi Mulin said in a low voice, Bai Shuali, if you dare to walk, I will break your legs and throw Xiao Bai into the pot. Her eyes were filled with tears. Yi Mulin, I hate you so much. She turned around and left, but he caught her in 2 or 3 steps. He held her in his arms and looked at Ai Wei, I won't see you out. Ai Wei was completely humiliated. She was about to leave with a cold face. Bai Shuali said softly behind her, Is she taking the fruit basket? Isn't she here to see the patient? Ai Wei resisted, Lawyer Yi doesn't want it. Rice worm touched her stomach, I am hungry. I have been starving for half a day. Yi Mulin knocked her head, why didn't you say so earlier? It was already late when she came in the morning. Did she run back and forth for 2 hours with an empty stomach? She didn't speak and just looked at him. Ai Wei couldn't stand this kind of little rabbit, so she put the fruit basket into her arms, you can have it. She couldn't understand how a family like the Bai family could raise such a weirdo. She was supposed to be a tough character, but why did she come and go like a punching bag? Yi Mulin still pampered her like a treasure. When she left, she glared at Bai Shuali. Rice Bug watched as she slammed the door shut. Then, she opened the fruit basket and washed an apple for herself to eat. She then looked at him. Is she angry because she's embarrassed? Yi Mulin ignored her and asked Secretary Li to buy lunch. After Secretary Li left, he looked at Rice Worm who was eating the apple. Can't you be a little more promising? Why do you eat people's food? He was so angry that Ai Wei's last look was to laugh at him. Bai Shuali said in a low voice while eating, I have already accepted it. He looked at her sourly, not daring to expect anything nice from her. As Bai Shuali nibbled on it, tears began to fall. Actually, it doesn't matter whether she slept with you or not. Anyway, you won't live for long. There's no point in fighting over this. He was both angry and amused. It turned out that all her magnanimity was because she thought he was going to die. He was so angry that he didn't know what to do. The girl who said she was hungry threw the apple aside and hugged his waist. She buried her face in his chest. Yi Mulin, I'll take good care of you before you die. I'll make sure your inheritance is worth it. She was so sad that her tears were falling. No matter how angry he was, he couldn't scold her. Moreover, it had been a long time since he had been hugged by her like this. He missed it. In his arms, Bai Shuali said softly, it's fine if you still want to have multiple wives before you die. I can get Ai Wei back. You don't have to be so depressed. Yi Mulin's face darkened and he pushed her away. She looked at him, tears in her eyes. Yi Mulin gritted his snow-white teeth. Before I die, I just want you to be with me. With that said, he hugged her in his arms again. This time, he seemed to have some ulterior motives. He kissed her and lowered his head to kiss her passionately. His intention was obviously to lure her to his bed. She wanted to reject him. But thinking that he was going to die soon, she held back and obediently let him kiss her. Her face was white and clean. Unlike before, she used to put on the most expensive skin care products every day. But because she was young, her skin was still very good. Moreover, she was less seductive and more innocent. Just looking at her, he was a little excited and wanted to hug her. He held her little face and looked at her carefully. His fingers caressed her delicate little face gently. His voice was especially low. Bai Shuali, have you missed me these days? Chapter 3392. She didn't know what to do being cherished by him like this. This was different from the coercion in the car last night. She looked at him, unable to say a word. After a long time, he sighed softly. But I miss you so much. After that, he kissed her again and carried her to the hospital bed. Seeing through his intention, she suddenly grabbed his hand in a daze. Yi Mulin, what do you want to do? But he still kissed her slowly. What do you think? Bai Shuali was scared and bit her lips. Let go of me, I don't want to. He looked at her and said softly, but I want to. She widened her eyes and looked very innocent. Yi Mulin, you're already like this. Why are you still thinking about such things? She seemed to have thought of something again. Is it because you're sick that you only have 1 minute? His face instantly turned extremely ugly and dark as he glared at her. Bai Shuali whimpered and said softly, I don't feel comfortable even for 1 minute. Why don't we do it? How could he continue doing it when she was like this? He turned over and was about to smoke when she immediately crawled over and took the cigarette away from his hand. Yi Mulin looked at her. Do you miss me? Bai Shuali wanted to get off the bed but was stopped by him. It seemed like he wouldn't give up until he got an answer. She raised her head and looked at him. Her eyes were misty and she lowered her head. It's useless even if I miss you. I can't even fill my stomach. What she said, he was angry and amused at the same time. He stared at her for a while before asking gently, "So, you still miss me, don't you?" She didn't make a sound. She just sat on the edge of the bed and shed her tears. Big tears dripped down and fell on her pants. She didn't wipe them away and just cried like a child. In the past, Yi Mulin wouldn't have liked such a crybaby. But now that she was his little wife, he seemed to like her. His voice became gentler. "Why are you crying again?" He reached out to take her tears, but she pushed them away. "It's none of your business." He smiled. Seeing her crying like a child, he felt a little sorry for her. "All right, don't cry. Aren't I right here?" She was originally just crying, but now she started sobbing. "I haven't even eaten a single meal you cooked. Why do I have to serve you while you're lying here? I'm still hungry even now." She bit her lips. "Yi Mulin, I hate you. I hate you to death." His heart was filled with warmth and an indescribable feeling. "If you hate me, then hate me. All right, stop crying." He turned her little face towards him and gently wiped away her tears. Her eyes were red from crying, making her little face look even whiter. He was a little moved and could not help but kiss her again. He kissed her gently, his fingers still lingering on her little face. Her face was cold, but it was the most real feeling. The door opened quietly. Secretary Lee stuck out her tongue at the door and retreated. However, Yi Mulin noticed her presence and called out to her, "Secretary Lee, bring the food in." His little worm had been hungry for a long time and was even angrier at him. Secretary Lee nodded and entered. Bai Shuali was still in Yi Mulin's arms. She was very embarrassed. Yi Mulin, on the other hand, acted as if nothing had happened. He walked over and served her some food. "Come, I haven't eaten either." Chapter 3393. Secretary Lee was amused. Lawyer Yi said that he didn't have long to live. Why was he taking care of her now? Mrs. Yi was easy to deceive, otherwise, she would have exposed the lie long ago. Yi Mulin signaled Secretary Lee to go out, and he took his rice worm to eat. She was indeed hungry, so she didn't refuse. Bai Shuali peeped at him from time to time while eating. He picked up a piece of potato for her. "What are you looking at?" She shook her head and continued to eat, but she started to cry again. Yi Mulin was a little helpless. He took a tissue and wiped her tears. "You are crying again, aren't you?" She was crying, and her little nose was red. She bit her lips. "Yi Mulin, I will take care of you until you die." Originally, when he saw her little face and her red nose, his heart was a little swayed. He thought that it would be very interesting to bully her like this. However, after listening to her words, his mind suddenly disappeared. He stared at her. "Are you here to take care of me or to piss me off?" Bai Shuali raised her eyes and looked at him with tears in her eyes. She didn't quarrel with him, but just shed tears. His heart was in a mess. His heart was in a mess. Finally, he sighed. "Well, I don't blame you. Don't cry, okay?" She looked at him and stopped crying. The way she looked like she was about to cry made him want to kiss her. "Yi Mulin, I always piss you off. If someone else takes care of you, maybe you can live for a few more days." She sniffled and said seriously. When she thought that he would die, the rice worm and rice became unappetizing. Yi Mulin was helpless. He could only coax her. Otherwise, what else could he do? After a long time, she finally believed that his death had nothing to do with her taking care of him. Then, she happily continued to stay and take care of him. She said that she was taking care of him, but what could she do? She couldn't do anything. In the afternoon, the auntie came over and hung up Yi Mulan's laundry. Of course, she hung it up for Bai Shuali as well. As she hung it up, she smiled and said, "Madam, let me help you wash it. You didn't wash it very well." Well, the clothes inside were. It was a long story. Fortunately, Madam came out wearing clean clothes. Yi Mulan leaned against the bed and pulled her clothes. "How is this clean?" She sat on the bed and peeled an apple for him, whispering, "This is Cece's dress. Don't you see it's a little small?" After she said that, Yi Mulan's throat felt like it was blocked. It was very uncomfortable. After a long time, he said in a low and hoarse voice, "Is it because you don't have the money to buy new ones?" Seeing him like this, she seemed to realize something and said in a small voice, "Many of my clothes need to be dry cleaned. I don't know how to do it, and I find it troublesome. Actually, Cece's clothes are pretty good and comfortable." Yi Mulan felt uncomfortable. He looked at her quietly for a long time. "Then, doesn't she give you pocket money usually?" "Yes, she will give me a week's worth of food, but I will spend it all in one day," she said honestly. His heart was even more damp as he asked softly, "Why don't you want it anymore?" She looked at him and said in a very small voice, "It's good enough to have food to eat while staying in someone else's house. How can you ask for this and that? It's not like he's your husband." Even though she would fight with Lin Cece for this, she knew that she was living under someone else's roof. She couldn't ask for things that she shouldn't. Chapter 3394. Bai Shuali looked at him. "After I ran away from home, you and Ai Wei stayed in the same hotel in Hong Kong and were even photographed. You didn't explain when you came back and even signed the divorce agreement." He was silent and reached out to touch her head. "It won't be like this again. You are going to die anyway. You won't have the chance to be so hateful." Then she lowered her head and didn't say anything. Yi Mulan was angry and distressed. When he was about to say something, her hand shook and she accidentally cut her finger. Blood suddenly came out. She was scared and cried in pain. "It hurts." Yi Mulan was also a little surprised. He immediately took away the knife in her hand and pressed her wound. He said to Auntie Li, "Call the doctor." Auntie Li thought that something serious had happened. She ran out and called Qin Chen and 2 nurses. When they came over, they found that the wound was only 1 centimeter and it was very shallow. Qin Chen bandaged it very carefully and joked, "Fortunately, you called the doctor early, or the wound would have healed by the time I came." Bai Shuali was stupid and couldn't hear it, so she didn't think much. Yi Mulan could tell that the black-hearted doctor was teasing him. He glanced at her and warned her not to go too far. For the sake of the 20 million yuan, Qin Chen didn't argue with a man who couldn't satisfy him. He left with the 2 nurses soon. Bai Shuali lowered her head and looked at the wound on her hand. "It still hurts." Yi Mulan's heart softened. He felt very comfortable when he saw her trying to be unreasonable here. It was more like he was taking care of her than she was taking care of him. He didn't need her to cut the apple. He finished peeling it and gave half to her. He couldn't help feeling sorry for her when she ate it. He wanted to ask her why Lin Cece didn't buy it, but he thought of the sentence, "Cece is not my husband," and swallowed it. It was also very beautiful to stay quietly like this. It was so beautiful that Yi Mulan was willing to stay in the hospital for the rest of his life. Auntie Li cleaned up and asked, "Lawyer Yi, do you need me to make dinner?" Yi Mulan thought for a moment. "No need. Just clean up in the apartment. Here. Shirley will take care of it." Auntie Li also felt guilty. Lawyer Yi, I'm sorry, I didn't know. Before he could finish, Yi Mulin interrupted him. It's nothing. The auntie had always been a little afraid of him. When he said that, she didn't dare to say anything more. Besides, the reunion of the young couple was better than anything else. So the auntie went back happily. The moment she left, Baishuali, the white rice worm, asked worriedly, Auntie isn't here. What about dinner? I'll do it, he said calmly. Her eyes widened. He pinched her nose and asked carelessly, Are you going to do it? She didn't know how to cook. She didn't even know how to cook. She didn't say anything and thought for a while. Who's going to wash the clothes? He looked at her and slowly said, You're here to take care of yourself. Don't tell me you want me, a dying patient, to wash your own clothes. Rice Worm hung his head. You were the one who said that I would be fine as long as I stayed by your side. You lied again. He was so angry that he cried. She was still in the right. Chapter 33-95. However, the laundry facilities here were different from those in the Yi family and the apartment. The laundry needed to be dried by hand instead of being dried directly. She looked at him and said, It's so troublesome. You are too stupid. He leaned against the wall and complained. He suddenly felt happy. It was precisely because of the existence of something as unsatisfactory as Baishuali in his life that he felt exceptionally happy. His expression became very charming. He was filled with happiness as he watched her walk around the balcony. When Baishuali turned around and met his eyes, she was stunned. She stood still, looking straight at him, her lips moving. Why are you looking at me like that? He smiled and stroked her face. She stared at him for a while and said softly, How do you know that I am looking at you if you don't look at me? After saying that, she felt that she was so smart and wanted to applaud herself. Yi Mulin smiled and moved his fingers to her lips. He said softly, Yes, I am looking at you. Then, he kissed her again. He was afraid that she would struggle, so he held her arms in his arms and kissed her softly. It was very gentle and lingering. Baishuali felt dizzy. She felt that something was wrong, but she could not tell what was wrong. She opened her eyes wide and looked at his handsome face. For the first time, Yi Mulin was satisfied with his looks. He was sure that he could take advantage of her. This worm was not only superficial and did not know anything, but he was also quite interested in women. He thought of Mu Bai, Gu Changfeng and all the men she had pursued before. They were all very good-looking. Just thinking about this made his heart feel uncomfortable and a little angry. This kiss also became a lot more ferocious. She couldn't take it anymore and retreated step by step until she was pressed against the wall. Her back was hurting from the pressure. Yi Mulin kissed her for a long time before he let go of her and walked back to the ward without saying a word. Baishuali was kissed like this and he suddenly stopped kissing her. She would be angry too, okay? Uncertain, menopause. She bit her lips and said, If you are always angry like this, you will die faster. Yi Mulin was flipping through the documents and got angry when he heard that. Baishuali, do you want me to die faster? She remained silent and froze for a while. Then, she saw his ashen face. That's right. Whenever he was angry or unhappy, he would give her a hard time. What's so great about that? He was about to die and he was still begging her to take care of him. What right did he have to give her a hard time? She was clearly living a good life outside. She waited for a while, but his face was still dark. Her throat moved, and the sweet taste of blood welled up. In the end, she bit her lip, took the suitcase, and threw the clothes that the auntie had washed into it. She didn't know how to fold them, so she stuffed them into the suitcase haphazardly, tears falling as she did so. She didn't care about him anymore. She didn't care if he lived or died. They were going to divorce anyway. Yi Mulin heard the commotion and paused for a moment before asking hoarsely, "What are you doing? Get out of here." She hung her head. "Give me $100 for the fare." He stared at her. "Why should I give you money?" She looked up at him, her eyes filled with tears. After staring at him for a while, she did not say anything else and carried Xiaobai out. Yi Mulin pulled her back. "Bai Shuali, do you want to solve every problem by running away from home?" Chapter 3396. Hearing her words, his heart softened and he sighed, "Why are you like this again?" She didn't care and opened the door to go out. There was a loud noise behind her. Bai Shuali was startled and immediately turned her head to look at him. Yi Mulin fell on the bed with a painful expression on his face. The luggage in her hand fell to the ground and she ran over to support him. "Yi Mulin. What's wrong with you?" He covered his heart with his hand. "It hurts here." She panicked. He grabbed her hand and rubbed his heart. "Help me rub it." She had never thought that Yi Mulin would use such a low-level trick. Bai Shuali was such a straightforward girl. Although she hated him and wanted to divorce him, she couldn't bear to see him in pain. She rubbed his heart and looked at him with tears in her eyes. "What's wrong with you?" He looked calm and stared at her quietly. She didn't say anything. "If you kiss me, I might feel much better." His voice was low and hoarse. Bai Shuali opened her eyes wide. "Really?" He smiled. "Really?" He had never thought that she was so gullible, but at this time, she really leaned over and kissed his lips. "Do you feel better?" Looking at her anxious face, Yi Mulin felt a tinge of guilt and softness in his heart. He seemed to have gone a little too far with her. He reached out and gently caressed her little face. His voice was low and hoarse. "Much better." She looked at him for a long time before she realized that she was wrong. She was almost lying in his arms, so she got up in a hurry. "I'm on top of you." Yi Mulin dragged her back and held her in his arms. "Don't go, I'm sorry." She was silent for a long time before she asked softly, "Is it because you're seriously ill that you want me to come back?" He smiled. So Bai Shuali also smiled. "That's good, but you can't kiss me casually." She lowered her head and said in a low voice, "I don't want to do it with you. If we have a child, I don't want the child to be born without a father." His face darkened and he stared at her. Bai Shuali didn't give in this time. She said softly, "We've agreed to separate." He looked at her. "So, taking care of me is my duty?" "Yes, if you think it's not enough, you can find someone else." Her voice was soft and firm. Yi Mulin looked at her. Actually, he realized that his millet worm had grown up and was different from before. He sighed and agreed, then took the documents into the study to deal with them. Bai Shuali bit her lip behind him. Are all terminally ill people as energetic as him? After a while, his voice came from the study. "Give me a glass of water." She nodded and poured a glass of water for him into the study. He was sitting behind the desk with piles of documents in front of him. She blinked. So many. Would he die before he could even finish dealing with it? Yi Mulin was concentrating on his work. Occasionally, he looked up at her standing at the door. "Why don't you come over?" Bai Shuali walked over and placed the cup in front of him. Then, she picked up the documents in front of him. "You're already in this state, and you're still dealing with work. You have nowhere to spend your money." He glared at her. She was not afraid of him, but still glared at him. Yi Mulin reached for it, but she took a step back. "I'm not giving it to you." You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.